I stood there in my white wedding dress holding the inheritance papers worth $16.9 million and made a decision that would save my life. I decided to hide it from my husband. Everyone called me paranoid. But 24 hours after the wedding, my mother-in-law proved me right when she showed up with a notary and a pen, demanding I sign over everything. My name is Rebecca Martinez, and this is the story of how keeping one secret exposed the biggest lie of my life. You know that feeling when something seems too perfect? When you're 32 years old and finally find a man who says all the right things, treats you like a queen, and his family welcomes you with open arms. That was David Chen. Tall, handsome, successful marketing executive who swept me off my feet with weekend getaways and surprise flowers delivered to my office. We'd been dating for 2 years when he proposed. Picture perfect proposal at Napa Valley, down on one knee with a ring that probably cost him 3 months' salary. "Rebecca," he said, eyes glistening, "you're all I need in this world. I don't care about money or status. I just want to take care of you for the rest of our lives." Those words should have made my heart soar. Instead, they made my stomach drop. Because sitting in my safe deposit box was documentation proving I owned MedTech Solutions, a medical device company my grandfather built from nothing and left to me when I turned 28. 3 generations of family legacy, now worth $16.9 million and growing. David had no idea. To him, I was just Rebecca, the quiet project coordinator at a nonprofit who drove a modest Honda and lived in a small apartment. And I'd worked very hard to keep it that way. But there was something in his mother's eyes during family dinners that made my skin crawl. Linda Chen would ask these probing questions about my family's finances, disguised as innocent conversation. "Oh, Rebecca, dear, does your family own any property? Any investments? It's so important for young couples to know what they're working with." I started giving vague answers, mentioning a small savings account, maybe some family heirlooms. Nothing significant. And I watched her face carefully each time. I know you felt this too. That moment when someone's interest feels a little too calculated, a little too intense, when their questions don't match their casual tone. That's when I decided to test something. During our next family dinner, I casually mentioned having a small inheritance from my grandfather, maybe $50,000 in stocks, nothing dramatic, just a little financial cushion. Linda's entire demeanor shifted. Suddenly, she was asking about investment strategies, suggesting David and I should pool our resources after marriage, talking about how family assets should be protected together. The way her eyes lit up when she said assets made my blood run cold. And that's when I heard the phone call that changed everything. I was staying overnight at David's apartment when his phone rang at 11 p.m. He stepped onto the balcony thinking I was asleep, but I heard every word through the thin walls. "Mom, I told you she's not some rich girl, just the inheritance thing, maybe 50 grand. Pause. "No, I haven't seen any paperwork." Another pause. "Look, we can figure out the financial stuff after the wedding, okay? Let me handle my wife." My wife? Not his fiancée. His wife. Like I was already property to be managed. The next morning, I started digging into Linda Chen's background. What I found made my decision crystal clear. Linda wasn't just a retired real estate agent like she claimed. She was a former property lawyer who'd specialized in asset acquisition and had been involved in 3 separate lawsuits related to contested inheritances. 2 weeks before our wedding, I hired the best trust attorney in the city. "I need my assets completely protected and invisible," I told him. "Can it be done?" "Absolutely," he said. "But may I ask why you're hiding assets from your future husband?" "Because I have a feeling he's not the only one I'm marrying." So I did it. I moved my entire company into an irrevocable trust, made myself the beneficiary but not the legal owner. On paper, Rebecca Martinez owned nothing but a small checking account and a Honda Civic. MedTech Solutions belonged to the Martinez Family Trust, managed by a board I controlled but wasn't officially part of. The wedding was perfect. David looked handsome in his tuxedo. I felt beautiful in my grandmother's dress, and Linda Chen played the role of loving mother-in-law flawlessly. She hugged me tight during the reception and whispered, "Welcome to the family, sweetheart. We're going to take such good care of you." Those words sent ice through my veins, but I smiled and played my part, the grateful daughter-in-law who was so lucky to marry into such a caring family, the modest girl who just wanted love, not money. I even made sure to mention during my wedding speech how grateful I was to finally have the financial security that comes with a loving husband. David squeezed my hand and beamed. Linda nodded approvingly from the head table. If only they knew that earlier that week, MedTech Solutions had just closed a $3.2 million contract with Stanford Medical Center. Our honeymoon night was at the Fairmont Hotel downtown. We'd decided to save the big trip for our first anniversary. David was sweet, gentle, everything a new husband should be. But as we lay in bed afterward, he brought up something that made my blood freeze. "Babe," he said, stroking my hair, "Mom mentioned we should probably get our finances organized now that we're married. You know, joint accounts, shared investments, that kind of thing. She knows a really good financial planner." "Oh," I said carefully, "what kind of financial planner?" "Someone who specializes in asset management, especially when couples are bringing different financial backgrounds together." Asset management. The same phrase Linda had used 3 times during wedding planning. "That sounds great," I lied. "Maybe we can meet with them next week?" "Actually," David said, and I could hear the rehearsed quality in his voice, "Mom thought it might be better to get the paperwork sorted quickly. You know how these legal things can drag on. She's actually arranged for someone to come by tomorrow morning, just to get the basic documents signed." Tomorrow morning. Less than 24 hours after our wedding. "What kind of documents?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "Oh, just standard stuff, making sure everything's properly transferred and protected. Mom says it's what all smart couples do." I lay there in the dark, listening to my new husband's breathing slow into sleep, and realized I was living with strangers. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of the doorbell at 9 a.m. sharp. David was already dressed and making coffee like this was completely normal. "That's probably Mom," he said cheerfully. "She wanted to bring by some wedding gifts we missed yesterday." But when he opened the door, Linda wasn't alone. Standing next to her was a middle-aged man in a suit, carrying a leather briefcase. "Rebecca, honey," Linda exclaimed, air-kissing my cheek. "I hope you don't mind, but I brought along Mr. Harrison. He's the financial planner I mentioned. Since you two lovebirds are probably eager to get your life organized, I thought we'd take care of the paperwork today." Mr. Harrison stepped forward with a practiced smile. "Congratulations on your marriage. Mrs. Chen thought it would be efficient to handle the asset transfer documentation while everyone's available." Asset transfer, not financial planning. Asset transfer. "I'm sorry," I said slowly. "What assets are we transferring?" Linda's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "Well, dear, now that you and David are married, it makes sense to consolidate everything. Your inheritance, David's savings, any family properties. It's much more efficient for tax purposes." "And safer," added David, though he wasn't looking at me. "Mom explained how married couples can protect each other's assets better if everything's properly documented." Mr. Harrison was already pulling papers from his briefcase. "It's quite straightforward. Just a few signatures and everything will be properly protected under joint ownership." I looked at the documents he was spreading on our coffee table. Power of attorney forms, asset transfer agreements, and at the bottom of the stack, a quitclaim deed for any and all inherited properties or business interests. They wanted me to sign over everything I owned. But here's what they didn't know. I'd been CEO of a multi-million-dollar company since I was 28. I'd negotiated contracts with hospital systems across 3 states. I knew exactly what these documents meant, and I knew something else. The night before, while David was sleeping, I'd made a phone call of my own. "Mr. Harrison," I said sweetly, "this is so thoughtful, but I'm curious. Who exactly is paying for your services today? His practiced smile flickered. I'm sorry? Well, these are legal documents that benefit my husband's family, but someone had to hire you, pay your fees, arrange this meeting. I'm just wondering who that was. Linda jumped in quickly. Oh, honey, don't worry about that. We just want what's best for you kids. That's so generous, I continued, but I always like to understand the business side of things. Mr. Harrison, when did Mrs. Chen first contact you about this? Now, Mr. Harrison looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Chen reached out several weeks ago to discuss potential asset management needs. Several weeks ago, before the wedding. They'd been planning this since before I was even married. Fascinating, I said. And tell me, what's your specialty? Do you usually handle simple newlywed finances, or is there something more complex about this situation? David was starting to look confused. Babe, what's with all the questions? Let's just sign the papers so we can get on with our honeymoon. But I was looking directly at Linda now. You know what's interesting, Linda? I did some research on asset protection after David proposed. Just wanted to be smart about things. And I learned that California is a community property state, which means that anything I owned before marriage remains my separate property unless I specifically choose to make it community property. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. I also learned, I continued, that any attempt to coerce someone into signing over assets could be considered fraud, especially if there's a pattern of targeting people for their inheritance. Mr. Harrison was quietly putting his papers back in his briefcase. Rebecca, Linda said, and her voice had lost all its warmth. I think you're misunderstanding the situation. Am I? I pulled out my phone. Because I have a recording of a very interesting conversation from last night. Something about figuring out the financial stuff after the wedding and handling your wife. David went white. You recorded us? No, David, I recorded you, talking to your mother about my assets before you even knew what those assets were. And then I played the trump card they never saw coming. The thing is, I've been running my grandfather's medical device company since I was 28, MedTech Solutions. We do $18 million in annual revenue. And yesterday, while you were planning this little ambush, I was closing a $3.2 million contract with Stanford Medical. The silence was deafening. So here's what's going to happen, I said, standing up. Mr. Harrison, you're going to leave now. Linda, you're going to explain to me exactly how many other families you've tried this scam on. And David, I looked at my husband of less than 24 hours. You're going to decide whether you married me or my money. Linda's mask finally slipped completely. You little bitch. You think you're so smart hiding money from your own husband? I think I'm smart enough to protect myself from people who see me as a paycheck. David was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Rebecca, you're worth... You own a company? I own a company that my grandfather built with his bare hands, that my father grew into a multi-million-dollar operation, that I've been running successfully for 4 years, while you thought I was just some non-profit worker you could manage. But why didn't you tell me? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Because of this, David. Because less than 24 hours after our wedding, your mother showed up with legal documents to steal everything I have. She wasn't trying to steal. Then what do you call showing up with asset transfer papers and a notary before I've even had my wedding coffee? David opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. Even he could see how this looked. Linda wasn't giving up. You can't prove anything, and David has rights as your husband. Actually, I interrupted, I can prove everything, because while you were planning your little heist, I was working with the best trust attorney in California. Every asset I own is protected in an irrevocable trust. You can't touch any of it. And David, I added, looking at my husband, has exactly 0 rights to anything I owned before marriage, unless I choose to give them to him, which, after this morning, seems unlikely. The room erupted. Linda started screaming about ungrateful daughters-in-law and family loyalty. David was trying to play peacemaker while demanding to know why I'd hidden the truth. Mr. Harrison had quietly disappeared, probably afraid of being reported to the state bar. But I just stood there, watching the people I'd almost trusted destroy themselves with their own greed. Because that's the thing about gold diggers. They always reveal themselves eventually. They just can't help it. The screaming match in our hotel suite lasted another 20 minutes before I did something that shocked everyone in the room, including myself. I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer. "Tom, it's Rebecca. I need you to conference in Detective Martinez from the Financial Crimes Unit. We have a situation." And the room went dead silent. "Rebecca, what are you doing?" David whispered, his face pale. "I'm protecting myself," I said calmly, keeping the phone to my ear. "Tom, I'm in my hotel room with 3 people who just attempted to defraud me out of millions of dollars. I have recordings, documentation, and a witness who tried to get me to sign asset transfer papers under false pretenses." Linda's eyes went wide with panic. "You can't prove fraud. We didn't—" "Actually, Linda, I can. Because while you were busy planning this little scheme, I was documenting everything. The background checks I ran on you, your history with inheritance disputes, the phone calls between you and David about my assets, before he even knew what those assets were." I looked directly at my husband of less than 24 hours. "Did you know your mother has been involved in 3 separate lawsuits related to contested inheritances? 2 families accused her of manipulating their children into signing over family properties. Both cases were settled out of court." David's mouth fell open. "Mom, is that true?" Linda's composure cracked completely. "Those were misunderstandings. People get emotional about money. People get emotional when they're being scammed by their children's spouses," I corrected. "Tom, are you getting this?" My lawyer's voice came through the speaker, crisp and professional. "Rebecca, I'm recording this call with your permission. Mrs. Chen, I strongly advise you to contact an attorney before saying anything else." But Linda was past caring about legal advice. Years of careful manipulation were unraveling in real time, and she couldn't stop herself. "You think you're so smart," she snarled at me, "hiding money from your own husband. What kind of wife does that?" "The kind who recognizes a setup when she sees one," I replied evenly. "Tell me, Linda, what was the plan? Get me to sign over the assets. Then what? Divorce David in a year or 2 and claim half of everything? I would never. Or maybe keep David in the dark and just manage everything yourself. After all, young couples need guidance with such large sums of money." David was staring at his mother like he'd never seen her before. "Mom, please tell me this isn't what it looks like." Linda looked between us, realizing she was trapped. "David, sweetheart, you have to understand. Girls like her, they use their money to control men. I was trying to protect you. By stealing from my wife? It's not stealing if it's family money." And there it was. The truth she'd been hiding behind all the concerned mother-in-law theatrics. "Tom," I said into the phone, "did you catch that admission?" "Every word, Mrs. Chen, you've just confessed to attempted fraud on a recorded line. I strongly suggest you leave the premises immediately and contact legal representation." Linda grabbed her purse, shooting me a look of pure hatred. "This isn't over, you little bitch. David is my son, and David is my husband," I interrupted, "which means he gets to choose who he stands with, don't you, David?" My husband stood frozen in the middle of our honeymoon suite, looking between his wife of 24 hours and the mother who'd apparently been planning to rob her blind. I need some air," he mumbled, and walked out onto the balcony. Linda looked like she wanted to follow him, but I stepped into her path. "I think you should leave now," I said quietly, "before I decide to press charges." "You wouldn't dare. Try me. I've got recordings of your son discussing my assets before our wedding, documentation of your history with inheritance fraud, and a room full of legal documents you brought to steal my company. How do you think that's going to play in court?" For the first time since I'd known her, Linda Chen looked genuinely afraid. She left without another word. I stood alone in the suite for several minutes processing what had just happened. 24 hours ago, I was a newlywed starting my life with the man I loved. Now I was a woman who'd just discovered her marriage might have been a long con from the beginning. David eventually came back inside, his face haggard. "Is it true?" he asked quietly. "About the lawsuits?" "Every word. I hired a private investigator the week after you proposed. Your mother has a pattern, David. She targets families with money, gets close to the children, then manipulates them into signing over assets, usually through marriage." He sank onto the couch, head in his hands. "I swear to God, Rebecca, I didn't know. About the company, about her history, about any of it. Didn't you?" I sat across from him, studying his face. "You knew she was asking a lot of questions about my family's finances. You knew she was pushing for quick asset consolidation. You knew she'd arrange for a financial planner to show up the morning after our wedding. She said it was normal. She said all smart couples do financial planning right away. At 9 a.m. the day after their wedding, with asset transfer papers already drawn up?" David was quiet for a long moment. "When you put it like that, David, I need you to be completely honest with me. Did you marry me because you love me or because your mother thought I had money?" "I love you," he said immediately. "Rebecca, I've loved you since our third date when you spent 2 hours helping that homeless guy find a shelter. I proposed because I wanted to spend my life with you. But you discussed my finances with your mother. She said she was worried about me, said I should make sure I knew what I was getting into financially. She made it sound like she was protecting me from marrying someone with debt or financial problems." I studied his face, looking for signs of deception. After 4 years of negotiating million-dollar contracts, I'd gotten good at reading people. "David, I'm going to ask you something, and I need a completely honest answer. If you found out right now that I was actually broke, that the company was fake and I had nothing, would you still want to be married to me?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes, absolutely yes." "And if I told you that my money is completely protected and you'll never have access to it, would you still want to be married to me?" This time he paused, but only for a second. "Yes, I didn't marry you for money I didn't even know you had." There was something in his voice, a sincerity I'd heard before in our quieter moments. The same tone he'd used when he told me about his father dying when he was 12, or when he'd confessed his fear that he'd never be good enough at anything that mattered. "Okay," I said finally, "but we need to establish some ground rules." "Like what?" "Like you never discuss my finances with your mother again. Ever. Like you cut contact with her until she gets professional help for whatever compulsion drives her to target families for their money. And like we go to marriage counseling to figure out how to rebuild trust after this disaster." David nodded eagerly. "Yes, all of that, whatever you need. And David, if you ever conspire with anyone to take my assets again, I will divorce you and make sure you don't see a penny. That will never happen. I hope not, because I've worked too hard building my grandfather's legacy to let anyone destroy it." Over the next several weeks, David proved his sincerity in ways that surprised me. When Linda called him crying, begging him to convince me to be reasonable about family finances, he hung up on her. When she showed up at his office, he had security escort her out. When she tried to turn other family members against me, he defended me so fiercely that his aunt called to apologize for Linda's behavior. Most importantly, he agreed to sign a post-nuptial agreement that explicitly stated he had no claim to any assets I'd owned before marriage and no management rights over MedTech Solutions. Ever. "I don't want your money," he told me as we sat in the lawyer's office. "I never did. I want you to feel safe with me." But the real test came 3 months later, when Linda made her final play. She filed a lawsuit claiming that I'd defrauded David by hiding assets before marriage. and that the trust protecting my company was invalid because it had been created to avoid community property laws. She demanded that the marriage be annulled and that David receive half of my company's value as compensation for emotional distress and financial deception. The lawsuit was nonsense legally, but it was vicious personally. Linda had hired a publicity firm to leak the story to business magazines, painting me as a manipulative wife who'd tricked her innocent son into marriage while hiding millions. She gave interviews describing me as a cold, calculating woman who destroys families for money. David was devastated. "I'm so sorry," he kept saying. "I can't believe she's doing this." But I wasn't sorry. I was angry. Angrier than I'd been since my grandfather died and left me a company that 3 generations of Martinez men had built with their blood and sweat. "You know what?" I told David one evening as we read the latest hit piece about our marriage. "I'm done being defensive. If your mother wants to play hardball, let's play hardball." The next morning, I called Tom with new instructions. "I want you to file a countersuit, attempted fraud, harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and defamation. I want her financial records subpoenaed. I want depositions from every family she's targeted, and I want damages." "How much damages?" "All of it. I want her to lose everything she's gained from her little inheritance scams." Tom was quiet for a moment. "Rebecca, that's going to be expensive and very public." "Good. I want it public. I want every family with money to know exactly what Linda Chen does to people who trust her." The legal war lasted 8 months. Linda's lawyers tried every dirty trick in the book, claiming I was mentally unstable, arguing that successful women couldn't maintain healthy marriages, even suggesting that I'd somehow hypnotized David into defending me. But the evidence was overwhelming. The private investigator's report detailed Linda's pattern of targeting wealthy families through their children. Bank records showed suspicious transfers from 3 previous family friends who'd signed over assets after their children married into Linda's extended network. Most damning of all, we found emails between Linda and a financial planner discussing how to maximize asset extraction from inheritance cases. The trial became a cautionary tale about financial elder abuse and inheritance fraud. Linda's face was on the front page of the San Francisco Chronicle, under the headline, "Mother-in-Law from Hell, How One Woman's Greed Destroyed Families." But the real victory came when David took the stand to defend me. "My wife," he said, looking directly at the jury, "is the strongest, smartest woman I've ever known. She built a multi-million-dollar company from the ground up while I thought she was just a non-profit coordinator. She had every reason to hide her success from me because look what happened the moment my family found out about it." He turned to look at Linda, sitting at the defendant's table. "My mother taught me to value integrity above everything else. But when she found out my wife had money, she forgot every lesson she'd ever taught me about honesty and respect. Rebecca didn't betray our marriage by protecting her assets. She saved it. The jury awarded us $2.3 million in damages. Linda's house was seized to pay the judgment. Her reputation was destroyed. Several other families came forward with similar stories, and she eventually pled guilty to multiple counts of fraud to avoid federal charges. But more importantly, David and I survived. We went through 6 months of intensive couples therapy. We learned to communicate about money, trust, and family boundaries. We created new traditions that didn't involve his mother's toxic influence. And slowly, carefully, we rebuilt our marriage on a foundation of complete honesty. 2 years later, David joined MedTech Solutions as our marketing director. Not because I gave him a job, but because he earned it. He spent a year learning the medical device industry, got his certifications, and proved he could handle the responsibility. His salary comes from the company budget, not my personal account, and he reports to our COO, not to me. He's never asked for equity in the company. He's never questioned my financial decisions. And when reporters occasionally ask him about being married to a millionaire, he says the same thing every time. "I'm married to an amazing woman who happens to be successful. I'm proud of her, not entitled to her success. Well, last month we bought a house together. David paid for half with money he'd saved from his salary. I paid for the other half with money from my personal account. It's in both our names, but we both know who contributed what. We've also started the Martinez-Chen Family Foundation, using profits from MedTech solutions to help other families dealing with financial abuse and inheritance fraud. David manages the day-to-day operations, while I provide funding and strategic oversight. Linda calls sometimes. David doesn't answer. She's tried apologizing, threatening, and pleading. Last Christmas, she sent a card saying she'd learned her lesson and just wanted her son back. David threw it away without opening it. "Do you ever miss her?" I asked him. "I miss the mother I thought I had," he said, "but I can't miss someone who was never real." Some people ask me if I regret hiding the company from David before our wedding. The answer is no. That decision saved my business, my inheritance, and ultimately my marriage. It revealed who David really was when the chips were down, and it protected 3 generations of my family's work from a woman who saw it as nothing more than money to be stolen. My grandfather always told me that the most valuable thing a person can have isn't money. It's the ability to see people clearly, to recognize who loves you for yourself and who loves you for what you can give them. That instinct to hide my wealth wasn't paranoia, it was survival, and it saved everything that mattered to me. Now when young entrepreneurs ask me for advice about mixing business and personal life, I tell them this: trust carefully, verify everything, and never apologize for protecting what you've worked to build. The people who truly love you will respect your boundaries. The people who don't were never worth trusting in the first place. David and I are planning our 3rd anniversary celebration next month. It's going to be small, private, and completely free of anyone who thinks marriage is a business transaction. Because real love doesn't come with asset transfer papers and a notary. It comes with patience, respect, and the willingness to choose your partner over everyone else, even when it costs you everything, especially then.